Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Michelle Flournoy, the co-founder and now newly returned as CEO of the Center for New American Security, and it's my great honor and privilege to welcome you to the 8th annual CNAS National Security Conference.
What we're here to do this morning for the next 50 minutes is to lift our heads, take a longer look, and ask, what does the world expect from the United States?
I, of course, can speak only from a European point of view. But from a European point of view, I think one thing is clear. We have needed American leadership in the past, and we will continue to need American leadership in the future. Europe is doing its best. Europe has made an effort to get its own act together. We're working on it. We have not yet reached a point where we can be happy with the kind of decision-making capacity that we have, so we continue to need leadership.
We are not suffering from NSA problems. People are killed in thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s in the Middle East. Nuclear weapon is developed in Iran. There are civil war all over the Middle East. Allies of America feel that America is not shaping the Middle East. It's disengaged from the Middle East. So yes, we do need trust and credibility, but it's much more serious than the issue of NSA spying on a chancellor. It's issue of whether the allies of America in the Middle East, who share with America the same interests, the same values, how we shape the events in the Middle East to go towards what America believes in: democracy, freedom, rule of law, human rights, women's rights. This is not what's happening in the Middle East.
If we have some sort of summarization of a regional response to the US leadership in Asia, I think, of course, it's very positive, it's very welcome, particularly given China's rise and some sort of lingering uncertainty. Then we'll see the security reliance of Asia to the US is running much deeper and broader.
I'm very concerned about where we stand in the world, and I'm very concerned about what that means for us. You might think that working on the budget would narrow your perspectives. National security would just be another number on a spreadsheet. That has not been my experience. Wrestling with the tough decisions, seeing the hard choices, running on a national ticket and contemplating all that comes with it, it has made me all too aware of what it takes to keep us safe and how our current policies, quite frankly, are falling short.
The Technology and National Security Program at CNAS explores the relationship between technology, strategy, and business. We're particularly interested in the pace and the location of innovation and the impact of that on national security.
I think the key is your point, signal and noise. As you look at industrial structure, I think the key thing to do is to separate, is this in the normal just pulling and hauling of pressures and counter pressures and developments that incrementally change the nature of the industry and the structure, or do we at a point of fundamental shift?
I think other things are globalizing as well. Violent extremism is globalizing. Religious internecine conflict. We see 500,000 people, refugees moving out of Mosul, Iraq, in what is essentially a Sunni Shia religious war. That's globalizing, and that's of deep concern. I'm also very, very worried about what I call convergence, which is the idea that weapons of mass destruction can potentially move not on traditional ballistic missile paths, but on narcotics routes, in and amongst refugees, in these vast movements that come all around the globe.
I'm Dave Barno, and I'm joined by Dr. Nora Ben-Sahel. We're both co-directors of CNAS's Responsible Defense Program. And we've got an unusual opportunity today to think a bit about the future.
There's a consensus that our military and national defense is in a state of crisis. Others, I believe, on the panel Perhaps I'll go into the details of that crisis, but suffice to say, we have the budget challenges, the readiness issues, the shrinking force and shrinking force structure, and then the unrestrained growth in the Pentagon's personnel and operation and maintenance accounts.
By early 2017, I think the next president will inherit a military that is sliding into crisis. The force will be considerably smaller. Only a small fraction of that force will actually be ready to respond to crises. The technological edge that has enabled U.S. military superiority for decades will be eroding or at risk in some critical areas.
For decades, I've assumed that the Indo-Pacific region is the locus of opportunity in the 21st century. And indeed, economic integration is providing that great engine of hope. Energy is a big factor in the future. But increasingly, it looks like the United States is the only risk-averse country in the region. China's tailored coercion in the East and South China Seas and along the periphery, Russia's annexation of the Crimea and alignment with China in blocking U.S. and other initiatives, Japan's desire to establish a new post-war identity that holds the line on its interests, Vietnam, the Philippines. Of course, North Korea was always risk acceptant, General Thurman, but that was the outlier. Now it's become the norm.
I think you've chosen the right terminology to refer to Indo-Pacific. A lot of you will have read Robert Kaplan's 2010 book, Monsoon, but one of the central themes of that book is that we ought to think about the Indian Ocean region in its broadest expanse. He says it's the central locus of power in the 21st century. It's akin to what the Mediterranean has been for the past 4 centuries. It's where the majority of the container traffic and oil and gas transit from west to east. It's where the majority of the rising powers are and the strongest militaries are. So I think you framed it correctly.
China is employing non-militarized coercion through a series of administrative, legal, diplomatic, law enforcement measures, always with the military utilizes sort of intimidation behind as a way of making progress on getting control over its long-claimed territories. And this is presenting huge challenges both to us and to our allies and friends in the region who are at a loss really as to how do you respond to this?
I think there's sort of a few buckets of risk that we're facing. So the risk question, the one that's most present in everyone's mind is what you might call sort of the flashpoint risk. And that is something that exists from the India-Pakistan disputes to the East China Sea, right? So, and certainly the Korean Peninsula, where somehow, somewhere in Asia, there's now a pervasive sense that the chance of a dispute sparking some kind of altercation, sparking some kind of conflict, there's a pervasive sense that that risk is going up and not down, that the danger that something will not be managed is going up.
I watched Kim Jong-un take charge in North Korea. I was a bit optimistic. We had the leap year deal happen on 29 February, where we were going to exchange nutritional assistance if they would quit their missile testing and nuclear development. And then he announces a Taepodong launch. On 13 April, he launched a Taepodong. It failed in the first 90 seconds. And we said, oh, well, we knew it was going to fail and all that. And then I watched on 12 April, put a satellite in orbit. That delivery means is the same delivery means that's on a KN-08, which is a road mobilized CBM with 12,300 kilometers. You have a very dangerous man over there right now. And I would characterize him as more dangerous than Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, because I do not believe the North Koreans will give up nuclear capabilities. They're not. They see that as regime survival.
CNAS, which you founded, does a remarkable job of preparing our next generation of national security leaders. That work is critical because our nation needs bright, dedicated, young women and men who care deeply about our world.
Veterans and military personnel are the human capital of our national security. We don't have a national security strategy, let alone execution, without them. And I want to talk with you today about a project that we built a year ago to learn more about this community and its past, its present, and its future. This is the Veterans Data Project.
We're so proud of the work he has done and will do. So in enduring recognition of Lieutenant Andrew Bacevich's exceptional commitment to the service of our nation, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Jake Stokes, the Lieutenant Andrew Bacevich Jr. National Security Fellow for 2014.
Thank you, Sean, both for those kind words and for your leadership at CNAS. I'm both deeply humbled and profoundly honored to receive this fellowship named for Lieutenant Bacevich. Today, I can more fully appreciate what President Lincoln meant when he said at Gettysburg that words alone can neither add to nor detract from the bravery and sacrifice of those who have served.
What I'd like to talk with you about today is an ongoing revolution in warfare. Now, militaries have always sought the latest technological advances in war, from the English longbow to the rifled musket to the rifle optics and night vision goggles that I carried as I walked through the mountains of Afghanistan and the streets of Iraq. Today, we stand on the cusp of a revolution in robotics. Robots are finding their way into factories, highways, our homes, and they will play a significant role on the battlefield. The U.S. military has a lead in unmanned systems today, but that lead is fragile. Experts estimate that by 2018, global defense spending on military robotics will top $7.5 billion a year. At that same time, global spending on commercial and industrial robotics will exceed $40 billion a year.
Persian Gulf crude production and the importation of that crude is very significant for the United States now, and it will be even more so in the future. This shale boom that we're seeing now is set to increase a bit towards the end of the decade, increase quite a lot actually. Then it will plateau for a number of years in the next decade, and then begin a decline. The only producing region that will be able to step forward and increase its supply for global consumers, including the United States, is the Middle East.
It reminds me of Henry Kissinger's old line, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not coming after you. You know, from their standpoint, how do they see the world? Well, they've heard a lot about the Asian pivot. Now, it's a pivot from what? Oh, that would be the Middle East. They hear a lot about energy independence, and that implies, gee, much less of a commitment potentially to them, and we've been the kind of ultimate guarantor of their security. They look at Iran, and in the case of the Saudis view the Iranians as, in a sense, a competitor almost at an existential level, because they compete religiously, they compete regionally. This is a regional balance of power that is now at stake from the Saudi standpoint, and they see the Iranians determined to acquire regional hegemony.
Putting aside the energy issues, there are all kinds of reasons why we are going to have to be engaged in the Middle East for some time to come. What is happening in terms of the al-Qaeda threat that is emerging now has been for some time in Syria, has reemerged in Iraq. ISIL has now toppled the government in Mosul and controls Nineveh province. This ultimately, ISIL is going to be in competition with what we called al-Qaeda core for the leadership of the al-Qaeda-related extremist movement, and the best way to win that competition is to show that you can hit the United States. So we are going to have a terrorist problem in the Middle East for decades to come.
A lot of what we heard revolves around this question of America's role in the world at a time of transition for the United States and for the globe. And as we look forward through the presidential election in 2016, this will be increasingly a topic of keen conversation and an animating aspect of what CNAS focuses on. So thank you for being here, and good evening.